And welcome back to the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and this hour we're going all the way from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, where our broadcast studios and center is, to New Zealand for our very special guest this hour, Jonathan Gray. Now, Jonathan is an international explorer, archaeologist, and author. Jonathan has traveled the world to gather data on ancient mysteries. He has penetrated some largely unexplored areas, including parts of the Amazon headwaters. The speaker has also led expeditions to the bottom of the sea and to remote mountain and desert regions of the world. His team has slept in the ruins infested with scorpions, dived among sharks, and dodged terrorist bullets. He has authored 54 books and produced 50 DVDs, and is a guest on numerous international radio and television programs. His website is www.beforeus.com. And Jonathan Gray, welcome back to the X Zone. Great having you with us.
It's my pleasure, Rob. Thank you.
So what have you been up to since you and I last talked a couple of years ago?
Well, Rob, we've been getting the news out, of course, through the airwaves, but haven't been on any more expeditions, except that we've been doing follow-up on expeditions already done to bring further confirmation of them, right, and their significance, some of them with modern-day situations and what's developing in the world today. Because the past often does reflect on the future.
It certainly does, and it seems no matter what happens, we humans never learn. But let me ask you this. I was going over the information that you were kind enough to send us, and I have to ask you, is it true that millions of tourists, thinking that they are at famous ancient sites, are really being taken not just to the wrong location, but to the wrong country? How does this happen?
Yes, they're being taken for a ride in the wrong direction.
Ba-dum-bum.
Well, I'll tell you what happened here.
Okay.
I was doing a British lecture tour and announcing the discoveries that we're involved in, and some skeptics got an independent investigator, John Bishop, to go physically to some of the sites to see if I was telling the truth. And one thing that upset them was what you've just mentioned, that modern maps are wrong in drawing Mount Sinai in the so-called Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. The truth was that Mount Sinai is really in Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
And anyway, this man went, he joined with the tourists. He went on a tourist bus to the traditional Mount Sinai.
Right.
And standing in the queue waiting for the bathroom, he met a couple from Nigeria. He said, "Do you believe that this is the real Mount Sinai?" Well, from the looks he received, you'd almost think he was asking, are we really on planet Earth? But something kept ringing in his head. Right. An ancient document in the biblical writings said that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. So he voiced his thoughts out loud to one of the guides. He says, look, if the Bible says that Mount Sinai is in Arabia and we're here in Egypt, well, then his voice trailed off. The implications sunk in, not very welcome. And then another guide said, this is Moses' burning bush. This is the bush that Moses stood in front of when the bush was burning. Well, now, Moses lived 3,000 years ago.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, could it possibly be the same bush?
Well, he drew a young guide to one side when most of the tourists weren't listening, and he said, do you really believe this is the bush? Oh, no. It's just a bush that the monks brought in here because it makes the tourists happy.
Oh, for goodness sake.
And then one other anomaly that stood out like a sore thumb was the pharaonic tombs and mining works, Egyptian relics all over the place. And the scripture says specifically that Moses and the Hebrews escaping from Egypt got out of Egyptian territory altogether so they wouldn't still be in the place where they're having Egyptian quarries and other Egyptian work. But the trouble is so many people are now making their living from this present
industry,
supposed mountain.
Right.
And the monastery receives thousands of dollars of donations, and Egypt earns a lot more in tourist dollars and shekels, and the local Bedouins control the touring around the area. And anyway, he was asking too many awkward questions, and would you believe it, Rob, he was arrested as he tried to leave Egypt on his plane.
Oh, my gosh.
And anyway, the plane wanted to go off thinking he might be a terrorist or a drug smuggler or something. So he spoke to somebody who was not in the picture too much, and says, "Can you tell them to wait for me? I've done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
I want to get out of this, then go back home." Well, eventually he was allowed to go, and the plane actually was held up for a while. But sometime later he did contact us again and says, "I've been arrested again, but now only interested in pictures that I've been taking and in books." So it's a big hoax. The whole thing has been going on for ages now, and tourists are paying lots of money to see something that really is not authentic.
Let me ask you this: that is so bad. It is so wrong. And for the governments to be involved in this, there's no excuse for this. It's just called greed, deception, lies, and fraud. But what explosive discovery is being covered up because it could actually start a war?
Well, this is something which goes right back to the same place, actually, the true Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, where Moses was told to lead the people, and they camped there for quite a while. And a temple, a temporary temple called a tabernacle was built, and in that was placed the centerpiece, the Ark of the Covenant. Now, it's the Ark of the Covenant that could potentially now start a war, Rob. It's very explosive.
Why could it start a war? What is the significance of the Ark of the Covenant for our listeners who may not know that it could actually cause a real war?
Yes, and it's for religious reasons as well as political reasons, and perhaps I should cover both those.
Okay.
Now, the purpose of the Ark of the Covenant, it was a golden chest which contained the Ten Commandments, and the covenant was described as the Ten Commandments. Now, what are the Ten Commandments? Well, really, we know scientifically that there are physical laws, and like if you jump off a roof, you'll fall to the ground.
Yes.
If you put your hand on a hot fire, you get burnt. Those are undeniable laws.
Right.
Now, the spiritual laws are that if you do certain things, you'll hurt yourself and hurt others. Well, that makes sense too. And the Ten Commandments is a list of spiritual laws which are universal laws. How we treat our Creator, how we regard Him, and how we regard our fellow human beings. And that's the religious aspect. And the fact is we've all broken those laws. And we have cut ourselves off virtually. We've sort of separated ourselves and become alienated against our Maker by wanting to go our own sweet way. And that's why the world's in such a big mess. Now, the message in the Ark of the Covenant was very simple, really, that cut off from our Creator, death comes upon us because He's the life giver. Okay? You cut yourself off from the source of life, you die, and we all die. And yet, medically speaking, there are scientists who say that we should keep on renewing ourselves because the stem cells that are released from our spine into the bloodstream go in search, and this is generally known, go in search of sick and dying cells elsewhere in the body, and they replace them. But as we go through years of living, this becomes less efficient now, and so we do die. But it shouldn't really happen. We were created to enjoy life and have a wonderful time and not be subject to death. That's what the Creator wanted. But we cut ourselves off from Him, and therefore we die. Now, He loved us so much that He wanted to do something about it.
All right, what we're going to do here, I have to take a break, Jonathan. Please stand by. And this is a bit of a cliffhanger because this is a very important story and a very important fact that you're going to be bringing up, and I don't want to have to interrupt you as we get closer. Exonation, our very special guest is Jonathan Gray, and Jonathan's website is, are you ready for this? beforeus.com. That's www.beforeus.com. And Jonathan and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I'm Rob McConnell. Don't go away, and to each and every one of you, since we're nearly at the halfway mark in the month of December, a very Merry Christmas to one and all, and nothing but health, happiness, love, and spirituality in the year 2019. Exonation, our guest this hour is a very special guest all the way from New Zealand. Jonathan Gray is my special guest, and he is an international explorer, archaeologist, and author. And Jonathan has traveled the world gathering data on ancient mysteries. And before we went to the break, you were telling us about the significance of the Ark of the Covenant. And if you could please continue, Jonathan, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, okay, thank you, Rob. The Ark of the Covenant virtually contained this message. Firstly, that there are spiritual laws, we observe them, we are happy and we live. We violate them, the ultimate result is death. But our Creator loved us so much that he wanted to do something about that. He couldn't bear to be separated from his creation. So he promised to send, or to actually come down himself in the person of his Son, who would become human, go through all the problems we go through, be victorious where we had failed, and then take our place and pay the penalty for us so that we could be free, because the law does have penalties if it's broken. It's the same as a man's law. And that reminds me of a man who was a well-known American television celebrity who was traveling too fast along the road. He was stopped by a speed cop, and the speed cop wrote out a ticket. And then as he asked for the man's driving license, he suddenly recognized the man and said, "Hey, my wife watches your show. She loves you. Oh, look, let me do something to help you." He went into his own wallet. He pulled out the $50 fine and says, "Look, I've paid the fine for you. The fine still has to be paid, but I'm taking your place. Here's the money. You go and pay it now with my money." And that's virtually what the Creator wanted to do. He took our place, he who had done no wrong, and the law was satisfied in that the penalty was paid, but we, the guilty ones, could go free. Now, that's the message of the Ark of the Covenant. And how is it that message? Well, this is how it works out. Inside that ark, that box, there was the Ten Commandments, the law that all of us have broken. Over that was placed a lid, and the name given to the lid was mercy seat. And then once a year, blood of an animal sacrifice, which was prophetic of this man who was going to come and shed his blood of an animal sacrifice was sprinkled on the mercy seat over the violated law. And the message was that our Creator will have mercy, but that mercy is only possible because someone's going to spill his blood on our behalf. That was the message, spiritually. Now, this ark was taken eventually up to the land of Israel as the Hebrews, who were the recipients of it, were placed in the crossroads of the world, and the plan was that they should share this with the whole world, and that's why they were put there in the middle of the three most populated continents, right there in the middle. And the city of Jerusalem then became the receptacle for Solomon's temple, which actually was the continuation of the purpose of the Saudi Arabian Ark of the Covenant. It was built to house that. That was its main purpose. Now, when the Babylonians came to the land of Israel in 606, and then came back twice more, and finally destroyed Jerusalem in 576 BC, the ark was not among the booty that they took away with them. In fact, in the Old Testament records, it tells us exactly what was taken away by the Babylonians, and the ark was not there among that. It had been so precious was it. It had been secreted away to an underground location just outside the old walls of Jerusalem, underground, where the Babylonians would never find it, and it remained lost for 2,500 years. And then it was found, and the actual contents of the ark still remained. The Ten Commandments were still remained in them. Now, according to Jewish tradition, the ark would be found eventually again.
Mm-hmm.
But when American archaeologist Ron Wyatt, after a 3-year dig, claimed to have discovered the Ark of the Covenant under Jerusalem, he presented one object from the same cave to the Israeli authorities, and they were able to recognize it as from Solomon's temple. And if you go to Israel today, to the Israeli Museum, you'll see this object, which was found by Ron Wyatt in the same cave beside the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Israeli authorities wanted to relocate the Ark in a safer place, because the part of Jerusalem where it was found was about 20 feet underground, under the Arab, very close to the Arab bus station, and they thought, well, this is not as safe a place as we'd like to have it.
Right.
So they wanted to get it out, but first of all, the antiquities director for Jerusalem at that time, Dr. Dan Bahart of the Hebrew University, gave Ron a permit to make the digging. It took 3.5 years for him to find it, because it was a whole honeycombing of places underneath that area. The old records located where it should be, well, not near where the ark should be, but where the crucifixion site took place. The crucifixion was a Roman method of execution, as you know.
Sure.
And crucifixion, the most famous person in history, was crucified, Jesus Christ. And now the explosive part politically was this. As Ron Wyatt dug down in front of Skull Hill, the place of the skull, which was part of the old quarry from which they took stones for Solomon's temple, he found the crucifixion site with 4 cross holes in it. Now, there was a crack in the rock going down from the most prominent one. The star attraction was the man that they wanted to get rid of most of all. I won't name him again, we just have done so.
Sure.
And from that elevated star attraction execution site, there was a crack in the rock, and it went straight down 20 feet through the rock into the cave below. Now, in that rock, there was a black substance. It went straight down the crack, and when the ark was found in the cave below, that crack continued into the ceiling of that cave. So from the cross hole above down to the cave itself, there was this black substance which had trickled down, and that black substance had to be tested. Now, it had fallen on the mercy seat. And by some strange coincidence of history, the Ark of the Covenant had been placed under the future crucifixion site, and those that placed it there didn't know what was going to come later on. And when the Romans chose that site to crucify Jesus Christ, they didn't know what was waiting for it underneath. And thereby, this amazing twist of history, the blood went onto the mercy seat over the law. And that was a message for mankind. That's right there now in Jerusalem, and still is there. Now, the blood was tested. Actually, what happened was the black substance was tested.
Right.
First of all, in a laboratory in Jerusalem, and then in 3 laboratories in the United States. And what was found was that from that crack there had fallen human blood. And that blood, however, was different. It had different features from normal human blood. And without going into the details of genetics, when the blood was tested, normal human blood has a total of 46 chromosomes, Rob, as you know.
Yeah.
And when a child is conceived, 23 chromosomes come from the mother and 23 come from the father. And the eggs produced by the female organism will be identical, containing only X-shaped chromosomes. And for her to produce a male offspring, the addition of a Y is necessary, but that can only come from a man. And here was blood that actually did not have 46 chromosomes. It had 23 which were identified as from the mother, and there was only one other, and that was a single Y chromosome, which cannot happen with an earthly father, because an earthly father would also give 23 chromosomes, not just one. And therefore, this was a male who was crucified, but he had no earthly father. And that was the verdict of the laboratories, the scientific verdict, that this person had an earthly mother but not an earthly father.
Wow.
Which, of course, backs up the biblical story.
Yep.
Now, Ron Wyatt invited my wife Josephine and me to privately examine the blood analysis certificate at his home in Nashville, Tennessee. And the reason I mention this is quite important, because it demonstrates his willingness to back up the truthfulness of his claim concerning the laboratory testing.
All right, hold on. We're going to have another break here, another cliffhanger. This is an amazing story. This is truly earth-shattering. And Jonathan, please stand by. Thank you so much for coming on the show and joining us, and for sharing this information with the world tonight.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Exonation Jonathan Gray is our special guest, and his website is beforeus.com. And Jonathan and I will be back on the other side of this news break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Go away. Exonation Jonathan Gray is our special guest, beforeus.com. And Jonathan, what was it like for you and your wife at this gentleman's home, looking at the proof positive that Jesus Christ was in fact, number one, a real person. Number two, his father was not a human as we know it. The evidence that you are holding supports the biblical account. How did you feel?
Oh, life will never be the same, Rob. It's so impossible to describe. It was like I was lifted out of this world into something very, very special that I'll never appreciate this world on its own anymore without that.
Yeah.
And I went to Oxford University to one of my lecture tours through Britain, and Oxford University geneticist Eugene Dunkley, with whom I have discussed this matter personally, the chromosome count, he said, is evidence that this person did have an earthly mother but did not have an earthly father. He said, beyond any doubt, and no geneticist would doubt it, would deny it. Now, not only that, but it goes further.
Okay.
There is a gentleman very well respected in the religious world. His name is Henry Groover.
Mm-hmm.
He's worked in over 70 countries around the world, and he gave me personally too some additional testimony. He said in Phoenix, Arizona, there's an organisation which is worldwide. It's called the Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship. Now, at the Southwest Regional Convention in Phoenix, Arizona, he said, I was at the table when Demos Shakarian, the founder of that organisation, had assembled a special meeting with Ron Wyatt. Unknown to Ron Wyatt, an attorney and a document specialist were going to be present. And the purpose of the meeting was to validate the certificates that Ron said he had received from the laboratories, which would prove the authenticity of the samples taken from the crucifixion site and the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem. Now, Ron had with him a blue 3-ring binder containing those certificates, and they were in plastic document protectors. And it included certificates from 6 labs, actually, 3 in the United States, 1 in Jerusalem, and 1 in Germany. And one of the lab result certificates pertained to the chromosomes of the dried blood Ron discovered in the cave beneath the cross holes that had flowed down onto the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And when Ron opened his blue 3-ring binder, the document specialist said, "May I have permission to remove the certificates from their plastic folders?" Well, Ron reluctantly granted permission to remove them from the document protectors as long as he didn't tamper with the documents or perform ink tests on the signatures. And the man removed them from the plastic and looked at each certificate very carefully. And, you know, Rob, this document specialist had a very large, thick book with him. And he had himself taken the effort to contact those same laboratories that Ron claimed he had been to. And he had brought with him the names and the data for all the labs in those countries. And he was able to look up each lab in his own book, as well as the record numbers, and he had all the signatures in his book, and he compared them with the ones on Ron's certificates. And he was also able to validate the record numbers from each certificate, and he looked at each signature with a magnifying glass, just like a jeweler does.
Right, okay.
Now, when he had finished examining each one carefully, he said this: "I would verify the authenticity of these documents to the top court in the United States."
Wow.
Now, he was a registered document specialist in the United States at that time. Now, when Demos Shakarian heard him say that, he just smiled, and then he said, "Ron Wyatt, I want you now to be the keynote speaker at our upcoming fellowship conference here in this city." So there's some further validation apart from what I've given myself.
With all this information that you have,
yes,
and the authenticity of the certificates, as well as the contents of the certificates, have been validated that, you know, this was the person who bled Jesus, had a mortal mother or a human mother, but the fact that the father, by all means, seems to have met the criteria of God. How come this information isn't blazing around the world?
Well, it should be, Rob.
Yeah.
There are people who are trying to suppress it, however. And let me tell you something interesting.
Please.
Dan Barhart, who gave the permit for Ron to start digging, as I said, he was a professor at the Hebrew University.
Yes.
And he was also in the Antiquities Department of Israel. He decided he wanted to go and have a look at the Ark himself. And so he went toward the excavation site, and as he was about 3 paces away from the opening of the tunnel, he collapsed on the ground, totally paralyzed.
Oh, no.
And he was paralyzed for about 2 weeks. And at the end of that 2 weeks, he made a statement. He said, "I am not going to try to view that holy Ark again." He says, "My life could be at stake." Now, However, the government, the Israeli government, wanted to get this moved out. And so they sent 6 soldiers dressed as Levitical priests, in other words, disguising themselves as holy priests.
Right.
And they went in from the northern, there's underneath actually, near the Damascus Gate, which is on the northern side of the old Jerusalem area. Mm-hmm. Just a few feet further to the east of that, there is a little doorway that goes under Jerusalem, and it's the rest of the quarry from which Solomon's temple stone was quarried, and it's a huge cavern now. And there was an entrance to go through the tunnel which goes towards Skull Hill. Now that tunnel is about 270 feet long, and as I mentioned, it goes about 20 feet under the street, below street level. These 6 men were sent in to retrieve the Ark of the Covenant, which was 270 feet in the cave below the crucifixion site.
Right.
And they never came out. Now, my wife and I were in Jerusalem when this event happened. They never came out. Now, Ron Wyatt himself flew into Jerusalem. We'd arranged to meet him, but he was delayed by a surgical operation, and he came in about a week late. But he contacted us again later and says, look, when I went in there, I always go to the Antiquities Department in Jerusalem, and I invite them to use my equipment while I'm in Israel in case they can use it for some project that they're interested in. But this time, they said, no, we don't need to borrow any equipment, but 2 weeks ago, something weird happened. We sent in these 6 men to retrieve the Ark and
mm-hmm.
bring it to a safer place underground under the Israeli part of Jerusalem, but these men have not come back out. We don't want to go in, we don't want to risk ourselves, but we know that you have gone in and out there safely 4 times. Would you mind going in and seeing what's gone on? So Ron went in, and he got about 70 feet in, mm-hmm. about 20 metres in, and here were these 6 men all lying on the ground in the tunnel on their backs with their eyes open looking at the ceiling. The interesting thing about their eyes, the whole 6 of them, was that they had both eyes crossed. One eye was crossed one way, the other eye was crossed the other way, the whole 6 of them.
Wow.
Now, I discussed this with a medical doctor, and he said, look, if whatever happens when a person has both eyes crossed, it's because he has a bilateral stroke. That means a simultaneous stroke on both sides of the body.
So these 6 people had the same stroke at the exact same time.
Exactly at the same time. Now, we believe that this is not the Ark. It's not anything wrong with the Ark itself, but this is a supernatural event. It's not natural. It's protecting. The Ark is being protected. But now, the reason that there are people who would like to get hold of the Ark, and these would be both Israelis and possibly Muslims as well.
All right, now we're going to have another. Your timing is perfect when we have to take this break. Please stand by, Jonathan. This is our final break. And Exonation, our guest this hour is Jonathan Gray, and his website is beforeus.com. And Jonathan and I will be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. This interview should shake the hell out of the world. Like, we have unequivocal proof that the Bible is true. We have unequivocal proof that Jesus is real and that God is real. We'll do everything we can to get this word around, Jonathan, so please stand by. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. As you may know, the tag for this show is Searching for Answers, Demanding the Truth. And what you're hearing this hour is the truth. Unequivocal proof that the Bible is real, number one. Number two, Jesus walked the earth. Number three, God is the Father of Jesus. And number four, there is a unified suppression that is being perpetrated so that this information does not get out. Well, we're going to do everything in our power to get this information out. And Jonathan, I want to thank you so much for bringing this to our attention and to getting this message out there. And Jonathan has a book. It's entitled Ark of the Covenant. It's available on his website, beforeus.com, as well as the book is available on Amazon. As always, Jonathan, it's always great having you on the show. Why is this information being suppressed? Who is suppressing it, and why?
Very good. Okay, now the Israeli government is trying to suppress it. What we have here in Israel, Israel is sitting on a tinderbox at the moment, where anything could happen, and there are extremists among the people in Israel who want to actually build a temple so badly that they're prepared to go to war with the Muslims to do so, to get rid of the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount, so they can build a third temple. Now that they are so keen on that they don't mind having a war, and they believe that if they were to have the Ark of the Covenant in their possession, they would be immune from catastrophe. In other words, the Ark would save them in a case of war, and they'd win the war. And then they would put it as the centerpiece of their temple after they've destroyed the Muslims, who would be outraged by their attempt to destroy the third holiest Muslim site in the world.
Right.
Now, they're willing to do that, and the Israeli government's very nervous about it. And they did put out a rumor some time back that just to test the waters, to see what the result would be. And the rumor was that the Ark of the Covenant has been found. Only they just put out the small rumor, and there was a bloodbath within a few days, and it was called the Temple Mount Massacre, in which scores of Israelis and Muslims died or wounded seriously. So immediately they realized that they didn't want to face this. It would be a war for sure. Only the mention of it caused the bloodbath. So if they actually physically showed it and revealed that they had it, it would be like a World War III right there in the Middle East. That's the political angle on it.
But why wouldn't it be possible that the Ark of the Covenant, shouldn't it bring peace? Shouldn't it bring harmony? Shouldn't it bring love? Shouldn't it bring spirituality if it's from God?
I do believe you're right on that, Rob. Yes, it should. But, there are enemies, and the enemies will do their best to foment a war. And I'll tell you something. The opposition against the discovery is supernatural, just as the discovery itself, I would say, is a supernatural event that has taken place. When I started writing my book, I was not going to write a book about this. My wife and I are people of prayer.
Right.
We felt strong impression that we had to do this. It wasn't in our plans. It was going to be costly, but it was going to be costly in both energy and finance. But we decided that we would ask about it in prayer, and the impressions came strongly to both of us independently. Yes, it has to go out. We have to put the news out. Now, each chapter was really something that we needed more information for. For example, we didn't have enough information to make a big book on this. One chapter, for example, was about Joseph of Arimathea. Now, he was the man who gave Jesus his own new, unused tomb and gave him an honourable burial, you might say. Now, the Sanhedrin, the Jewish religious hierarchy, had wanted to get rid of Jesus. They made 11 attempts on his life during the 3 years, but his time had not come because it had to happen at a special time.
Mm-hmm.
That was also predicted. The time was predicted. And the prophecy said when it was going to happen, and so nobody could make it happen before. But once they had him, it was only because he allowed himself to be sacrificed. He knew why he had come, and the time had arrived. And the Jewish Sanhedrin actually hated him so much because his blameless life showed up their hypocrisy. And they were very jealous and very antagonistic toward him right through his 3 years ministry. Now, once they had him on the cross, they wanted to give him a criminal's burial also and throw him on the rubbish dump, the Gehenna rubbish dump just outside the Jerusalem walls,
Yes.
To die and be burnt with other criminals. But Joseph, a member of the Sanhedrin, got an honourable burial for Jesus. Now, he was a marked man at that time, and we wanted to know what happened to him, but I didn't have the information.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife and I had a prayer session together at home, and we said, Lord, if you want this chapter to be written, you'll have to provide the information. Do you know what? I went to the post office that day, and a parcel had arrived from Great Britain right across to Australia.
Mm-hmm.
It left Britain 2 weeks before, and what was in the parcel was a whole sheaf of information about Joseph of Arimathea that one man, a school teacher, had been collecting for 20 years. And he said, I don't know if this will interest you, but he sent it, and it arrived the very morning we needed it.
What did
Timing, impeccable.
It is, but what happened to Joseph?
Joseph actually was arrested by Saul of Tarsus, and Saul got another dozen people and arrested them, close followers of Jesus, and arrested them as well, took them down to a boat at Jaffa, took away the sails and the oars from the boat, pushed them out to sea to die, and this way no one would get the blame. They just went out to sea and they died themselves. But Joseph actually, being a wealthy man and also having had a fleet, he knew the Mediterranean well. He ended up successfully with his companions on the south coast of France. From there he went to Britain, to Cornwall, to a little place called Glastonbury, where he used to have contact with the people before because he was wealthy from the tin mines of Cornwall. And he then began saying that the Messiah has come. And the whole of Britain accepted it because Joseph actually was talking to people who had the prophecies already, but didn't know anything about Jesus Christ having risen from the dead until Joseph came to England and told them. And the Joseph story is an interesting one. I'm going to write a book, and I'm calling it the man who needed 2 graves, because he'd need a second grave since he gave his first one away.
Right.
And it's a very interesting story, Joseph of Arimathea. He ended up in Britain, and he was the result of Britain becoming the first Christian nation.
Isn't there also a connection between Joseph and the Holy Grail?
There is said to be, but I haven't been able to confirm it.
So what do we do with this great amount of information that you have? You know, the information that proves so very much, Jonathan. The information that will turn hearts that are rock into hearts that love and will live again, because everything that is in the Bible is proven to be correct. What do we do? How do we get this information out there?
Well, I think, Rob, you and I may be small fish in the total sea, but if we can tell others to share it as well, this is not about selling a book. It's not about money.
I understand
give it away. And this should go out free to everyone. It's information. It's so precious and so valuable.
It's earth-changing.
Yes, it is.
It's earth-changing.
And I'll tell you something that happened to the book. when I was giving a lecture in Australia at a place called Emerald in the town hall. A husband and wife travelled 200 miles just to come to a 1-hour lecture. This was about the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
They went home. The lady took a copy of the book with her. Her husband went to work. Her little 6-year-old girl was at school. The mother decided to pick up the book, and suddenly she felt it being pulled out of her hands by an invisible force. And a voice came and said to her, "Mom, you don't want to read that rubbish. Let me throw it away for you." And he threw it across the room. The book was snatched out of her hand and thrown across the room. Now, when she got home, she told her husband the scary thing that had happened.
Right.
And she was sitting at the she was sitting, or rather standing at the sink, washing the dishes. And suddenly, she felt hands around her waist, and she was lifted up toward the ceiling, and she was physically in front of her husband and in front of her little 6-year-old daughter, thrown across the room.
Jonathan, I hate to do this, but we're out of time for tonight. We'll get you back on in the very near future so we can work together to get this information out there. But until then, my friend, thank you for all the great work that you do. You will be blessed. And all I can say is thank you from the world. At Exo Nation, if you'd like to find out more about our guest this hour, Jonathan Gray, his website is beforeus.com, and the name of his book is Ark of the Covenant, and it's available at amazon.com and other places. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.